Hello and welcome to the Mastermind, Body, and Spirit Show. I'm your host, Matt Belair. Today's guest is the founder and CEO of HARA. He focuses on developing the whole person, knowing that high performance is determined by how you live, not just how you work. He helps develop habits of mind to thrive in competitive environments. He has trained leaders in high-performing teams to bring more structure into their lives for greater focus, energy, productivity, mental resilience, and life balance. Welcome to the show, Patrick McAndrew.
Thank you very much, Matt. Pleasure to be here.
I'm excited to dive into this, man. We had a nice conversation before, and I know you cover a lot of, information around the power of attention, but you also have a background in working with high performance leaders, high performance teams, which I think is something great for this audience because we're always trying to, be our best, to maximize, to optimize, things like that. And attention is so key. And it's something that we haven't touched on in a while in this show. So I'd love to just get you to share a little bit about your background, how you got into the work you are doing today.
Yeah, absolutely. So I can give quite a condensed version because it's a lengthy one. But the condensed version is that I took a speed reading course for my own curiosity and interest back in 2018. And I was very, very captivated by it. I studied law in university, and I found myself, I had an inner dialogue that I was a slow or a bad reader during that time studying. I don't know if I really was, but I certainly felt that way in comparison to those around me. And that's often how we develop our model of ourselves, is that it's not in isolation, it's in the context of those around us. So in relation to those that I was studying with, I thought I was a bad reader. And I carried that with me then throughout my life, where a lot of the books that were lying around my apartment were just indicators of my incapacity to read the way that I wanted to. They were reminders of books not finished. So I took this course and I realized, wow, there's a range of approaching reading that I never thought of before. I had such a one-dimensional view on that skill, and I've come to realize that it's an incredibly complex matter. And that's what's most interesting about it, that we learn how to read when we're 3 or 4, but we never really upskill, despite the fact that the complexity of the material grows throughout our lives. So that experience in taking that speed reading course shifted something in me. It made me aware that our minds and our intellect is very fluid, and we can manipulate it and stretch it and grow it into whatever we wish. So I became super interested. Suddenly reading became a game. It wasn't just an activity. And I also became quite interested in memory. And then I started working for that company, Iris Reading, which are definitely the largest speed reading and memorization training company in the United States. It's a pretty niche business. So in saying that they're the largest, they work with a lot of major organizations and institutions. And I got to travel around as an instructor and a coach, working with a lot of high performers in universities and in businesses, helping them with how they process and retain information. And everywhere I went, the same thing arose. I saw people struggling to focus. I saw people explaining how they really struggled to do what they wanted to do. And this was not just for executives, it was for a lot of younger kids, because we went to some high schools as well. And I got this perspective to realize, wow, this is happening everywhere, and no one is talking about that topic. So I decided to stop teaching speed reading and memorization, because it was nice, but I didn't consider it necessarily as essential as focus and attention. I thought that was the precursor to everything else. And that's what I did. I stepped away and I started to draw my attention to that. And here we are 3.5 years later. We've worked with a lot of different organizations. We've helped a lot of people bring a sense of calmness and stability, a capacity to organize and control themselves in ways that they never had before. And for some people, for the first time in their life, they've got to experience what it's like to focus and to complete a task. So that's where we're at.
That's amazing, man. Well, I'm reminded of when I was a teenager basically, and then I went to the library and I started learning on my own and realizing, holy smokes, there's all these books that I want to read. And I remember reading a memory book. I remember reading a book on how to think and learn to think. And I was like, holy, there's so many interesting things here that I was not taught in school that are incredibly helpful. And I learned a lot about memory. And then it's interesting how you've kind of gone past that into attention. And we have a society now which is constantly being bombarded through social media. We used to have just, our television sets, we could shut them off, and maybe some, radio and things like that. But now it's a whole new world and it's at the palm of your hand. So it really increases the challenge that we face to manage our attention wisely when we could be easily pulled in many directions. I'd love for you to talk about, maybe if you can give us like a basics of what you learned about speed reading and a basics of memory, if you can summarize that with your mastery, and then maybe we can move over into attention and how we can manage our lives.
Yeah, so on the speed reading front, I mean, the basics things that I was taught and what I applied was that there are old habits which hold us back. So some of those old habits that we take from a young age are fixation, where we fixate our eyes on each word. That happens because when we start reading at a young age, the dog crossed the road, we're learning these words, and we're also learning how they all fit together to create a sentence structure for the syntax. So we start and we learn that cadence of focusing on each word, but we don't actually need to do that. We have a much broader peripheral vision, which can take things in chunks. So that was one thing in shifting how your eyes organize themselves, and you can change how your eyes organize themselves in different environments. So that was one thing. The other was subvocalization. There's a natural tendency, and it does happen. It's not something that you get rid of, but we often vocalize every word that we say, and that slows you down. So that was one thing to become aware of. And the next thing was regression, which is that if we don't fully understand something, or if we lapse our attention, we will often regress and reread what we've gone through. So we'll go back to the last chapter, the last paragraph. And that can end up feeling like we take 2 steps forward, 1 step back constantly, because we keep missing out on our attention or forgetting something. And that can mean that after 3 pages, we're very frustrated. So we put the book down. So there's ways of coping with that and changing that. There's exercises that we would have done. And then small things just in little tips, which made huge changes, were to improve with your capacity to focus and attend to the material, was to decide how much you were going to read before you started. So oftentimes we'll pick up a book and we'll just be like, oh, I feel like reading right now. But then we might think of something we want to check in the internet, something might come to our mind, and then we let our attention shift straight away and go to something else, and we forget about the act of reading. And over time, we think, oh, I can't read because it's too boring. So a way to overcome that is to decide when you sit down or wherever you are, how long you're going to read for. So that could mean that you're on page 65 and you see that the chapter ends at page 74. You've decided, I'm going to read until the end of this chapter. And that means that if a prompt or a thought comes into your head, you can recognize it, but you don't have to respond to it because you've got another 12 pages left to go and you're going to stick it out. Little exercises like that make a big, big, big difference. And the final one that I want to share is how you take notes. And this will also inform how you use your memory, which is that there's the convenience and the ease of anything that we want to learn about from a book that we're reading. We can go deeper in it by picking up our phone and Googling it. But that's a trap in itself because it pulls you away from the source material that you're working on right now. So what I developed was a note-taking system, which makes it really easy to go back and look through a book to see what resonated with you. And that is, I use 1x, 2x's, or 3x's to denote how important the information is that I underlined or that I made notes about. Then I'll use a G for any of the things that I want to go back and Google. So at the end of the book or at the end of the chapter, I'll just find all the G's and I'll use that time to Google them. If there's a quote that I want to capture, I'll use a Q. Those are the kind of the major ones, but whatever kind of symbols you want to use, it's like a map. You create a legend for reading. And suddenly when you go back and look through a book, it's very easy for you to reread then a book because you're looking at all of the, it's identified, you've identified what the information is. And then from a memorization point of view, the things that we were teaching, I wonder how valuable they are today, especially with the way we have information in ChatGPT. The way that we need memory now is not to become information gatherers, but it's to become information hunters. And that's to develop faculties of the mind rather than faculties of holding information. So when it comes to memory, to be able to hold, process, and integrate what you learn, it's to focus on that word, which is integration. Everything that you're doing, whether you're listening to this podcast, argue with me, disagree with me, agree with me, look at where you think I'm contradicting things that you see differently in your life, and do the same when you're reading a book. And that's where we get the opportunity to actually integrate new concepts and new schemas into our worldview. And that was a big shift for me in understanding that the act of reading is not a passive act. It should be a very active engagement. The same is true for podcasting. The same is true for watching videos. The way that we consume information today in the more engaging forms are often that they're so engaging that we don't have to do anything. We are allowed to be very passive. You know, if you look at any of the explainer videos that are often quite popular on YouTube that are animated, they're often so full of color and illustration that there's no gaps. There's no gaps that allows you to actually fill in the space. It's telling you everything. And those are shallow forms of learning because you don't really have to think. It's just infotainment. So be wary and careful of that. Go towards the spaces that are difficult and challenging because that's where the learning happens, because it forces you to actually engage in the material. Explaining things to people is really helpful too. So that's trying to keep it tight. I could probably stretch on and on about this topic, but that's just giving some perspective on the topics of reading and memory.
I appreciate that. Those are really helpful tools. I remember when I read when I was younger, I'd take notes and I put just a little dot. So your legend system is a huge upgrade that I can apply immediately. I just take a little dot, and then what I would do is rewrite it that I have book notes for what I had. And you can definitely upgrade the system. And now I still have the notes from the books I read in my teenage years in a binder that I still have. I've kind of changed the system a little bit, but that will be helpful. And I'm reminded of a quote by Bruce Lee that I really love, and it says, "Knowing is not enough, we must do. Willing is not enough, we must apply." And since we are in the information age and we can, as you said, hoard information, that's one thing, but are we applying it? Are we learning? Are we thinking? Are we being active? Are we being passive? And that's going to change how you integrate, how you understand, and how much wisdom you have, because you're going to need to apply it to have wisdom. You're going to have this real world experience and not just a digital document of what you may have learned. I love all that, and I'd love for us to now dive into like what you're really focusing on now and how you've evolved your work in the attention game. So how do we regain our control of our attention so we're not being constantly stimulated and distracted and be as productive as we can?
I think it's difficult to talk about such a broad topic in such a narrow way. I'm hesitant to reduce things to tips and techniques because they don't really do a huge amount. It's often there's something that I like to think about as a question to consider if you're listening to this is what is your world orbiting? And what I mean in that sense is yes, we are living in this world, but we all have our own internal landscapes. I'm seeing the beautiful geometric shapes and illustrations in the background behind you, Matt. And I'm thinking about how we all have our own inner worlds. And within our own inner worlds, they are all orbiting something, whether that is work, whether that is our digital presence, whether that is the sports team that we love, whether that is constantly being aware of the news, whether that is your family. Those things dictate how we organize and orient our lives. And for a lot of us, we have, of course, these are broad generalizations that I'm making. So if they don't relate to you, that's absolutely fine. I'm just speaking in broad strokes of what I see in a lot of the people who we work with at HARA and the programs that we run. And one of the major challenges that people face is that they have designed their lives to be as available as possible. And as a consequence, they've become completely unavailable to themselves. So their day begins by being woken up by the alarm on their phone. And then as they roll over, their screen is full of notifications telling them what to do. Now, that's not necessarily new information. We're quite aware of that, the implications of having your phone in the bed with you. It's hugely problematic. I think a study that was done it was research more than a study that was done, but it was done by could have been like AT&T or Verizon, but it was obviously exploring the relationship that people had with their phones. And back then in 2015, 70% of people slept with their phone either in the bed with them or on their bedside locker. And I'm sure that's grown even since then, because our lives have become so intertwined with the digital experience. So the thing which I'm exploring, the thing which I'm most interested in is, how have you organized your life? And have you thought about it? And why have you done it that way? So a simple question, if we come back to the phone, when did you decide that your phone would become your alarm clock? Most people don't. It just happened because it's the most convenient thing. And when did you decide that you would have 7 different apps where people can communicate with you on? You probably didn't. It's just that one person said, hey, connect me on WhatsApp, it's the best. And then somebody else said, hey, get me on Telegram. And then you saw that there was somebody sent you a link for something on Instagram, and you got an Instagram account, and then Twitter, and then TikTok, and then LinkedIn. And now what you end up with is you end up with all of these Tamagotchis. If we can remember what the Tamagotchi was like, where it was a digital pet, and people would have to rush home as kids and teenagers to make sure that they watered and fed their Tamagotchi before it died, because it only had a 12-day life cycle. What we've done is we've created loads of digital Tamagotchis, and now it's not even just that we need to respond to people, but it's that we need to know about these things all of the time. We need to know constantly about the breaking news that's happening in the world of sports. We need to know about the breaking news that's happening in the global news cycle. And all of these demands and expectations that we place on ourselves are actually eroding the space that we have to often live the life that we want, because your attention is your experience of the world. So that's where I kind of like to enter this conversation, rather than reducing it to tips and techniques. There's loads of people out there that can talk about that. But, the realistic approach of how much they'll work is dependent on your internal state. So I'm more interested in your internal state, that if that gets aligned, it brings a major shift in the quality of your attention. And the other thing that I just want to say about this, Matt, is that this is not about productivity. This is about your potential. Becoming more productive is a consequence of that. But a lot of people try and be super and hyper productive to the detriment of their own potential, because in many ways we're too focused nowadays. Our eyes, we spend all day looking at the medium-sized screen, or we can call it the big screen, which is our computer. We take little breaks in front of the small screen, and we relax in front of the large screen. We're hyper-focused. Mentally, we might be disengaged, but our eyes are completely narrowed and focused, which is sending a signal to our nervous system that we're focused. So we never actually get to relax. We never get to just sit back, take a breath. And the body is set up to need to do that, to move between intensity and rest. And we're in a constant state of intensity, but the quality and the direction of that intensity is actually not being oriented towards how we want to live. So, yeah. Where should we go from here?
Well, I love that summary. And I don't know if you've ever heard this concept before of the scrying mirror, the black screen. It's like an occult concept where it takes your energy. So all the screens, you said small screen and medium screen, and I thought about scrying mirror. So you might enjoy Googling that and looking deeper at that. It's something that can suck your attention, suck your life force, keep you distracted. And I just love how you gave that how we organize our life. Like but even before you said it, I was like, oh, my phone's beside my bed. I really should get an alarm clock that's somewhere else, and my phone is out of the room. It's so simple. And I don't think many people have really considered how they organize it. And so when and I know a lot of your work, which I love and I really resonated with, you talk about like developing the whole human being. And when I work with an athlete and I work with athletes, it's the same idea. It's like, you want to be the best athlete you can. And if you are terrible, if everything is crap in your life, you're not going to be the best athlete you can. You know what I mean? If you could be whole, happy, and harmonious, and then go to the court, go to the competition, go to the whatever, and everything is aligned, that's great for many reasons. Number one, you're going to perform better, you're going to feel better, you're going to be in flow, and your identity is not attached to the result. But your life in general is better. You're a better father, you're a better friend, you're a better teammate, you're a better everything. And you feel better, which is the whole, back to you, is that you feel better. So when you begin to help either an individual or a company, how do you start with managing attention? Because this goes back to, the most fundamental teaching in any kind of Zen or mindfulness philosophy is manage your attention, be in the present moment. Do you want to be in the present moment? Or like you said at the beginning, which is a very powerful insight, is people are trying to have as much time as they can. And what will happen is it'll just get filled up with random stuff rather than your direct attention and your intention for what you want to create. So you're being pulled, and it can be very frustrating feeling, because I know that I've designed my life like that in the past. And I feel like I definitely have a lot of room to improve how I'm doing it now. And I know exactly I have a whole week fill up with nothing by, organizing things, and it's not the most productive way to be. So where do we begin in restructuring our attention and process?
One thing just on what you spoke about there, I'll get to that absolutely. But one thing that I just want to bring up is that this is very distinct from mindfulness. And I know you weren't necessarily connecting it to mindfulness, but I just want to make this point that I've spent plenty of time in yoga centers and on meditation retreats. And I've seen people who are so still and solid over 10 days of meditation. And I'm there agitated by the mysterious pains that arise in my back. I get these mysterious pains that shoot up my back after like 90 minutes of meditation. And as soon as I come out of the deep meditation, they go, there's something that needs to be explored there. But I have not got to that state where I can be solid as a rock for sitting for 3 hours. But there are people beside me who I have seen that way. But once the 10-day silent retreat is over, I've seen how they get sucked into their phone. I've seen how they struggle to actually manage their attention in the daily life, in the daily world. And I practice meditation, and spending time in 10-day silent retreats has been a life-changing experience for me. It's taken the depth of the experience of meditation far further than years that I spent just doing 20 minutes a day. But this is something different than that. What we're talking about is actually that this is more about, I come back to that point of what does your life orbit? It's more about thinking about that. And that comes down to what are your values? So there's two places where we can go with this. The first one is to distinguish your values, is to recognize, do you know what your impact is, or what the impact is that you wish to have? And therefore, if you do you know what needs to be done to accomplish it? And if you do, then make space so that those few things can be done, because it's rarely actually to accomplish the things that we want that we need to do lots of things. It's typically just a few key things. Now, the challenge is that once you've identified that, it might come and push up against the fact that your sense of value is on how much you are in demand. Because for a lot of people, their sense of value is based, even though they might not have consciously thought about it, it's based on how active their phone is, how active their inbox is. And they'll use it as the complaint to say, I have no time. I'm constantly having to get back into my inbox. I'm constantly having to answer my phone. People are so needy. They need so much from me. But the truth is that you set that up. It didn't just happen. Your phone, your email, your inbox, all of those things, they came with a zero at the beginning, but you started setting it up and organizing your life so that they started filling up, whether it's newsletters and subscriptions, or multiple different bank accounts or credit cards, or all sorts of things that you can ascribe yourself to. And the same is true then for all of these different apps and platforms. So that's where it begins, that we think that by spreading our availability, that's what's important. But it's not actually. There's certain things which are important, and that's what's really crucial. That's where a lot of our workshops begin, is helping people get clarity, clarity on where they stand, clarity on where they're going. And that clarity is what allows them to inform how they'll design and architect their life. Now, once you have some clarity on that, and you know what's important, and you've more importantly been able to identify what's unimportant and to discard those things, then where we begin is by creating a stability around your evening routine. So for a lot of people, one of the major reasons why their attention and their cognitive capacity is so reduced is because of the quality of their sleep. And the quality of their sleep is impacted by either not being able to wind down themselves. So they need to rely on their phone by looking at social media or watching videos or watching the TV to fall asleep. The other implication is that they need a nightcap and they have a drink, and that has a huge implication on the quality of your sleep. Another one is that they're just completely restless at night and that they're in bed for 2 or 3 hours, and that affects things. And then the fourth one is that a lot of people that we work with eat for extensively long periods of time. They might eat over, a lot of people we find eat over 15 to 16 hours, because the kind of individuals that we're working with, they wake up at 5, they have their first cup of coffee, they might have something to eat, and then they're having a glass of wine and a snack at like 9 p.m. in the evening. And the consequence of that is that their internal organs are working for such a long period of time in actively digesting food that this leads to a lot of inflammation, and it reduces the capacity to get good quality rest in the evening. So we try and give people tools and techniques to take control of their own nervous system, because for a lot of people, their phone has become the stimulant and the pacifier. It's what gets them out of bed in the morning, and it's what they use to lull themselves to sleep at night. And what we know is that our brain starts to develop a schema of our body where the tools become associated to certain parts of our body. So for example, a knife and a fork are not just simply objects, they're extensions of our hands. And if you're brought in to eat, like say, I experienced this in India, if you're brought in to eat, say, a dish with lots of different plates or different dishes and rice, and you have to mix it together, I found it really hard to actually, like, the activity of like scooping that up and putting it in my hand. I didn't even have that dexterity in my hand, because I didn't have the sensitivity, because it was reduced, because I associated so much just eating with a knife and a fork for most things, especially if it were a spoon, if it was rice or whatnot. The same happens with our central nervous system. We lose that capacity to receive the signals of how we actually feel. And then we start to rely on outside external tools to do it for us, like alcohol, like our phone, etc. Now we're going to see the next phase of that with ChatGPT and AGI, where people's cognitive capacities are going to be reduced because they're going to actually become dependent. Now, some people will use it to its great strength and maintain their cognitive skills, but a lot of people will lose the quality, just like we're seeing people lose the quality of the capacity to read because they feel like they can just get the information through audio. But the implication of that is by listening to audio or watching it in video doesn't force you to think as much. So coming back to the root of your question, the evening routine, we get that stable. Once we get that stable and there's a consistency there, then people are waking up with more energy and more clarity of mind because their body is getting the healing that it needs in the evening time. And then we start to lay out some practices in the morning routine, because getting space for yourself won't just appear. You have to create it. You have to create it and commit to things and then organize your life around these pillars being there. So for some people, the pillar is exercise. For some people, it's meditation. For some people, it's a walk. Who knows what it could be? It's totally up to you and your life circumstances, but you make sure that it's there. And a large part of that is getting outside, because so much of our lives are spent inside. Then the final part is we get to the work, and the work is where we talk about the tips and techniques. But before that, it's all about the life structures. So really, I think if people could get better rest, just simply by getting better rest, that's the true hack there. They would see that their lives improve dramatically. And taking some breaks throughout the day. Those two things sound so simple and so basic and unsexy, but that's where the real wins come from.
Well, I love all that. You shared so much valuable information and you put it into ways I think that are easy to understand, but also to realize the power of. And often it's not about what we do, it's about what we let go of, right? So maybe you're watching the screen every night before bed. You're doing these things that are really taxing you, right? And I can just always do it from a sports performance analogy, but if you have a competition coming up and you exhaust your body through stress, and then you have to perform at your highest level. Well, a lot of that energy is now zapped. So what in your life is zapping your energy? What in your life is zapping your attention? What's zapping your emotions? And you bring it back to the central nervous system. And that's so important too, because that's like how we are operating at a very deep, I don't even know how to phrase it, not subconscious, unconscious, but a very primal level, like, where our energy systems are, and treating how we're viewing the world and what the habits that we're doing, how that affects our internal system at the deepest level is such an important concept. And it's often not what you're adding, but what you're taking away. And so that's so important. So I'd love for you to just share maybe when you talked a bit about clarity, how people, a simple way for people to get that clarity, a simple way for people to have a night routine and a morning routine. And then we'll dive into the next step, because even those ideas of changing things by a percentage. So let's just say you're running a model right now that's producing 50% energy. Well, you take out a few things, you might get another 25% energy, just as a random analogy. But that 25% can really be the catalyst to then refine what you're doing and see the difference in how you operate and how you think. And this same example is used very often in diet. People, you run the same diet for years at a time, and then they'll do whether a cleanse or an elimination diet, or look at it and they'll say, oh wow, I didn't even know that I could have this much energy, this much clarity, how it's affecting my brain fog, things like that. And so it's just important even to just change things up, to test them, and then you can see how it works and refine the process. And the most challenging one is often the first time. Just like when you haven't gone to the gym forever, it's the first time you go. But if you can change that one small thing, then it can lead to a cascading effect to really optimizing how you think, how you perform. And the most fundamental thing you touched on is how it aligns with your values. So at the end of the night, if you do, one of the things I like doing is a day review, you can then look and add that in there. Today, did I align with my values? Did I spend any time on what was most important? Maybe it's being a good father, a good husband, or whatever the case is, right? Or producing a podcast, putting a little time into reading something you enjoy, to exercise. And you do that every day and you realize you're not aligning with your values. And now you can change things and really have a clear picture of if you're walking the talk of what you decide.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much to pull apart from that, Matt. I think the first thing with clarity is that, I mean, you absolutely can put the conditions in place to get more clarity, but it is something that kind of arises. It's, do you ever have that feeling where there's a haze and then the haze starts to thin out, and suddenly there's a clarity, and thinking, how did I not see it that way? Why was I approaching it like this? So a large part of that is coming from the quality of your energy. So very hard to get clarity if you're having 4 cups of coffee a day, because it's a nervous energy. So it puts you into a very nervous state. And when you're in a nervous state, it limits and deprives access to your prefrontal cortex. And that will impact your capacity to truly think in long strokes and long stretches. You'll just be thinking in the immediacy, and you'll be thinking from a much more agitated state. So the quality of the food that you have has a big impact on that. There's much that could be said on that. It's probably a hard thing to answer in a general circumstance of how do we get more clarity, because it's on a case-by-case basis. But if I could make one generalization, I think one thing that's so needed today is to place limits and boundaries on ourselves, that we're suffering from abundance. We're not suffering from scarcity, So all of the things that were presented to us as being progress was to take us away from the clutches of scarcity. How there was the threat of maybe not getting enough food, or not being guaranteed shelter, or the discomforts. I think back to stories of that my mum and my aunts told me growing up in the west of Ireland, where they told me stories of having to walk 7 miles a day to school back and forth. And this was cold, wet weather in the winter. And then when they'd come home, there was no central heating. So there was just a fire, and they'd have to cover themselves in loads of blankets. And that's how they'd stay warm in the evening. And we have none of those elements today in the world that you and I are living in. We're so incredibly blessed. But to the other extreme now, that what's occupying us is how do we handle everything that's coming at us? It's not that we're going out hunting and searching for convenience and comfort. It's that we're overburdened by the amount of comforts that we have. Everything that's being fed to us is for greater convenience. So much of the businesses that are being developed, so much of the supposed innovations are about further convenience. Reduce the friction, reduce more and more friction in your life so you can just get what you want. Do we even know what we want? I don't think so. I think we're being fed concepts of what we want. We're being fed this concept of progress and that progress is related to more ease of access to material goods. I don't think so. I think progress is growth within yourself. I've seen people who have very little and have chosen to live that way, but have an immensely rich life. Whereas if your life is just on the basis of chasing more material goods, sure, on how people see you and perceive you in certain circles of society, they might think that that's great. But the social and psychological elements of life are often very hollow beneath that. So that's another stretch of a topic. So to bring it back maybe more concisely to the question that you asked, I'm just going to share a little story of a gentleman that was in one of our programs, and he was a salesperson and he was really struggling. This was more related to the time of COVID, because he went from being in the field where he was out meeting clients to now doing his role from home. And he was struggling to get his work done. And when I say his work, like to actually drive more and to bring in more clients, to make calls, to do outreach, to connect with potential clients, interested clients. He would maybe have to, let's say, make 25 points of contact a day, but he was getting caught in just getting 9 or 10 done, because his day was constantly his tasks were constantly being interjected by different demands from different people. And when I spoke with him, I asked him what was his workstation like, his work desk. And he told me that he had 2 monitors, he had an iPad, he had a smartwatch, he had his iPhone on the desk, he had a computer there. And basically what he did is he designed his life that the more that I can get reached, the easier it is to reach me, the better. That means that I'm doing my role well. And we spoke through it and we said, well, what's actually important here? So he realized that he had done it completely wrong. He had made the important things inefficient and he had made the unimportant things efficient. And he needed to flip things on their head. So he just got his iPad, he got his phone, but he turned off the data so he could just make calls on it. He has Salesforce open on his iPad. And then he had a legal pad, a piece of paper, where he would go through and he would take notes of the people that he needed to call. And he told me for the first time in his life, he experienced focus, and it felt so good. For the first time that he could just get work done in 90 minutes and then be done with that major task and move on to the more responsive elements of his day. Because our days are split between being proactive and reactive. We don't just live in one space or the other. And that proactive nature typically is best done in the morning. There was another gentleman who I spoke to who would make his proactive work, he would schedule it for between 2 and 4 in the afternoon. But at that stage, he was exhausted. There was so much on his plate. He was so busy responding that he couldn't even generate the mental energy to get it done. So that's maybe where the clarity comes from, is creating certain anchors for when the good work is done. I want to talk about the evening and morning routine, but I just want to give space if there's anything that you wanted to talk about on that.
No, I love this. I feel like I'm getting a high level quality lecture. So I'm just listening and thinking about how I'm going to apply all this in my own life. So please continue.
Okay, so on the evening routine side of things, what we want to look at is a natural winding down process. And once again, it's case by case dependent on the individual. So a very important thing, once again, very simple, is to plan tomorrow today. Because and the reason for that more than anything is to tie up the uncompleted tasks within our own mind. Because if those scripts are still running, that's what ends up percolating and pervading in our mind. So I know, for example, like sometimes I write in the evening, and it's often like if I do it too late, God, it ruins my sleep, because I can't stop wanting to go to the laptop every time a new sentence or a way of rewriting that sentence comes to my mind. So I need to create space between like the most recent task and when it's time to rest, because what happens is that if we're trying to focus on something and we step away from it, we get a lot of new ideas and insights. And for a lot of people, they are so occupied throughout the day, they haven't given themselves a moment to really process what's going on inside, that then when they their head hits the pillow, it's like everything just explodes upon them. And they want to get away from themselves. So in the act of getting away from themselves, they shift their attention once again away to what's happening inside, to an external stimulus. They turn to the TV or there's something to listen to. And fair enough, okay, if you do that once. But if you're doing that night after night, you're constantly negating the messages that your own internal system is telling you. And you're depriving access to your own self. And that leads to emotional issues. It certainly leads to fragmentation of your attention, but it can lead to a lot of tension and stress inside your body. So a really important part of the evening routine, the evening practice, is to give space to all of the many things that you've consumed, that you've dealt with, the conflicts, the things you've learned, the things you struggled with. Really important to let that out. And, that's not just by going for a super hard workout, I don't believe. I think it needs a tapering off period, which sometimes for me, it was going for a swim in the evening, because you really, your mind can start. I find swimming for me, and personally, it was incredibly therapeutic thing to do. But for others, it's going for a walk in the evening, and going for a walk in the evening is incredibly relaxing. It's calming for the body. For some, it's to go to the sauna, and in the sauna, it's great because you're sitting there for 20 minutes, 15 minutes, and you're literally letting things play out in your own mind. Now, you want to be careful there, because you don't want to just enter into it. This is where practices of mindfulness are really helpful, because then you can sit back and observe all the thoughts and the things that are arising. But you don't want to necessarily get caught in the trap of your own mind, but you want to let it play itself out. For others, it could be journaling, where you're writing things down. Sometimes for me, it's just sitting on the couch, like I've had an intense day today, and after this podcast interview, I'm probably just going to sit on the couch for about 10 minutes, and I'm just going to feel what I feel. And I'm just going to let it breathe. I'm just going to let my body relax a bit. Because if I go and shift and go straight into eating food or straight into exercising, I'm going to carry that tension with me into my night, and I'm going to get worse sleep. So it's this elasticity that we want. It's this elasticity that we can stretch ourselves, but then we can kind of let go, and we can come back into ourselves. And I think this is where there's, I can't speak directly, but I'm coming from more of a practitioner's perspective rather than constantly leaning on the theoretical perspective. I spent many years reading a lot and speaking to a lot of neuroscientists, and I had fascinating conversations, but I found that most of them are theorists. They have great insight into research knowledge, but they are not necessarily practitioners of the knowledge itself. And that comes with a very different experience. We all know what it was like to meet a teacher who knew a lot of information, and a teacher who had a lot of wisdom, because they had tried and practiced these things. So that's the kind of approach that I'm going for. I certainly don't feel like I have a lot of wisdom. I feel like an apprentice still at this stage, but it's about integrating it into our lives and seeing how these concepts and theories work. So I really think that the evening aspect of it is the most important. And once you get some stability there, it suddenly breathes space and life into your morning routine. And for every individual, it's different in that circumstance, whether you have kids or you're single or you like to exercise or what part of the world you live in.
Amazing. I absolutely love that. It reminds me of something I learned a long time ago, and it was just the nightly review. And that really changed things for me, because there was so much emphasis on the morning routine. And when I added in the night review, I was able to look at my day. And I think there's so much value in planning your day ahead, because then you can make sure that you're aligning with your values. And some people even suggest to do it a week ahead, which is also incredibly valuable to do as well, because you can ensure that what you're doing is lining up with what your values are. And then when you add that nightly review, you can see if you did it that day or you decided to, not align, and you'll notice that you have this incongruence going on in your body at that point, and you don't feel great because you're not lining up with who you want to be. And I interviewed Stephen Kotler recently, and I liked what he said. He's like, I work for the boss, and that's where his higher self that has his best interest in mind. So when he creates his days and his task lists and all the things he's got to do, he did it beforehand that align up with his values and his goals and what he wants to achieve and who he wants to become and the impact he wants to make. And so when he's doing, when he gets up, he has to work for that person, and he just shows up and does the best he can. And I think that's such a really great way to organize ourselves to ensure that we're aligning with what we truly want. And the other thing I wanted to say about sitting down, just sitting down and going for a swim or going for a walk, it's letting the central nervous system relax for a second, and you're processing the day. And what many people do, I would say most, it's got to be a very high percent from what I've seen, is it's always got to be something like you said earlier, is external, from YouTube or from a video or from something, or eating or alcohol or whatever the case is, rather than just sitting in silence. And now with my daughter, she's only 3, and I'm looking at the effect of the screen, and we're really trying to limit that the best we can. And I can see how it affects her moods, and I don't want it to become a crutch. And she's so young. And when we were kids, we just were bored. I didn't have the iPad, or, I had 2 channels on TV, right? So we had to figure that out. And so we're really training her in a way to say, hey, this is available, but it shouldn't be. There's got to be things that parents do to keep them away. And as parents, we get locked in that track of the dopamine or whatever it is, that the neurochemicals of having that quick hit of the YouTube video or the TikTok or whatever the case is. So, what else is it that we should cover? I know you said we could go a few steps further after the morning and night routine, and I don't know what you were referring to there. Like you've shared so much useful and practical information. I'm just curious, what was if we missed any like meat and potatoes, because you're like, there's another thing we can do for our attention throughout the day. So do you know what I'm talking about? Is there more? You've given us so much. Is there more? Give me more.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think there's a couple of things to talk about that you just brought up there, where maybe the first thing is that incongruence that you spoke about, like that agitation that you feel. Agitation probably isn't the best descriptive word. I would say it's I think it's more of a frustration. It's more of frustration and a disappointment, an internal disappointment, which happens where you set out what you want to accomplish that day and it doesn't happen.
I think guilt too, which is a deep one.
Guilt and shame. Shame is a big one, right? Yeah. And it can be a volatile emotion if we don't know how to handle it. And that friction that we feel inside of us, that incongruence, is an indicator. It's a wonderful thing. So there's a lot of people that come into our programs and they'll talk about how they don't plan their day out anymore because they are so sick of not being able to do what they wanted to do. And really what it is it's a wonderful feedback loop. It's presenting you with reality. So something needs to change. Either your expectations of what you can accomplish need to change, or your habits need to change, or your patterns need to change. And it should be a way of searching internally to see what's going on, to see why is this arisen? What's going on? I spoke with a friend who suffers with chronic pain, and he's been suffering with it for 4 years, and it's really impacted his life. But he's learned so much because he had a great meditative practice way before this, and he's spoken about how there's two completely different experiences in dealing with this chronic pain. There's the one in which you experience how you wish your life could be. And he said, if you go into that headspace, everything becomes unbearable because you keep talking about how awful it is that you're experiencing this and how you wish it could be different. And the more that you do that, the more the pain becomes searingly painful. Whereas when he sits in it and he's like, what is going on here? Where is the pain? And what is being experienced? He said it's not that the pain disappears, but the way that he experiences is completely different because he accepts the reality of what's there, and then he learns ways to respond to it. And on any given occasion, it's different. The response is different, but he gets the right information because he looks at it. Now, for many of us, we don't look at it. We run away from it, and we think that the issue is planning. Oh, no, it doesn't work. It doesn't work. This organizing, this planning in advance doesn't work. But actually, it's a wonderful feedback loop because you've set the intent, you've tried, it hasn't worked out. That's absolutely fine. So try again today and see how it'll go tomorrow, and keep making iterative processes. And that's where you create process. That's where you actually develop a craft at what you do. Anybody who's developed a craft at what they do, it's been a constant iterative process where the failures are just indications of lessons and learnings to take. They're not indications of you actually being a failed human being. They're just lessons of mistakes and issues in the process that you've created. So that's just one thing that I wanted to speak about, because I think that's so important in that internal agitation that we feel. And you, there was a point that I have written down here, and what you spoke about in relaxing. If you can bring me back to what you said on that, in how we often go to our external stimulus, right? But you had an interesting thought there that I just wanted to expand on.
Yeah, I'm going to add one thing too. I wanted to just share there with the morning routine and how we're planning our week. I think one of the big things I learned is doing too much. And there was a time in my life when I could have a 2-hour morning routine. And I did that for quite some time. And it was, meditate and exercise and journal and visualize. It was nuts. And then as things changed, I couldn't do that. So it'll teach us to prioritize, right? So maybe we need to cut back on what we're doing, right? When we're reiterating our process and really getting clear on what's the most important thing and ensure we're doing that. And when I was talking about letting the body settle, I just recall sharing like your value of sitting on the couch, letting the central nervous system relax versus just going ahead and like looking at our phones and finding this external stimulus to get a dopamine response and, being bored as a kid. Like the value of being bored, of thinking, of processing, of just experiencing and not always looking out, it's you should be okay with being bored,
And I'm so glad you used the word value, because this is where it comes down to. It's honestly about valuing your own experience of this life. And this is actually ties it quite in nicely into dopamine, where the dopaminergic system, there's two which are at play. There is the dopamine system, which when you were bored as a kid was at play, where it was like, wow, there's nothing to do here. Oh my God, look, maybe we could build something out of that space over there. Yeah. Well, we call a few friends. Yeah, let's go and do it. So that is more of the dopamine control circuit. Whereas you get this idea of, oh, that would be so cool to do that and to create that thing. Or you get an idea of something that you want to work towards. I want to do a marathon. Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to do that. And it's this further goal which we aspire to. And it is the incremental movement towards that goal, and it's the potential of fulfilling that goal that is what drives us forward. That's what keeps us going, and that incremental progress and the vision and the imagination. That's where our minds are so incredible when they're tethered in the right way, that if we can really get the capacity to be bored and have space and to let our mind wander, to really think about what it is that we want, we can tap into that dopamine control circuit, and we can work towards and create and design incredible things. And you're bringing amazing people on this podcast, and even just the effort and the consistency and the persistence that you have to do this. And you told me you're going to be reaching 600 episodes soon. That is the dopamine control circuit in action. That's this sense of, I want to bring something to people. I want to bring something to the world. But the inverse of that, the slightly more malignant and dangerous side of that, is the dopamine desire circuit, which is that it is this sense of, I'm not feeling so good right now. I'm feeling this inner agitation. So I'm trying to work on something. I'm trying to focus. But as I'm trying to focus, I'm feeling kind of agitated inside. I don't feel like I can focus today. Do you know what I need? I need to go outside, and I need to go to the coffee shop, and I need to get a cookie. And if I get that cookie, I'm going to feel so much better. And for that moment, in the pursuit of going out and getting the cookie, you feel, yeah, that's, I feel like this is going to be good now. But then after the cookie, the agitation returns. And then you return back to do the work at hand, and the agitation is still there. And that's the issue that we face today in many ways, that every time we feel this inner agitation, we have no capacity to truly experience it and to accept it for what it is. So we go out in pursuit of something that's going to ease that agitation, and that's constantly feeding that dopamine desire circuit. So the flip side of our experience is that we have two systems at play. We have this dopamine desire circuit, which is, the dopaminergic system, which is very helpful for creating things and working towards things, but it's also quite dangerous in how it can lead us to more compulsive pursuits and addictions. And then we have another side where they've been referred to as the here and now transmitters. They're referred to in the book. The book is going to come to me. The Molecule of More. The here and now transmitters, and that's referring to the transmitters like oxytocin and serotonin and the endocannabinoids, and they are what make us experience things. And if we can think about this when it relates to food, I wrote an article on my Substack recently about taste and how it can be a therapeutic act depending on the mindset that we bring to it, where it's very easy to be sitting and eating your food whilst watching a video, because you feel, and I've been experiencing this lately, when I sit and eat on my own, I feel that there's not enough stimulation that I desire to put in a set of earphones to listen to something or to watch something. And in doing so, whenever I do that, I never actually experience the food. And I'm constantly pivoting my attention between a little taste from the food and kind of listening to what I'm engaging in, but I'm never fully learning the thing that I'm listening to, and I'm never fully enjoying the food because my attention is split. And more importantly, I'm downgrading my capacity to actually tune up those here and now transmitters. I'm downgrading my capacity to move out of the dopaminergic system and into the here and now system. And the here and now system is what allows us to experience the world. And there's so much incredible beauty that we can experience the world. I was in India in January and I left my phone with the reception at the center that I was at. And I didn't look at it for the first 2.5 weeks. And at the beginning, it was a little bit difficult, but after literally a day or a day and a half, I was able to really enjoy the sound of the river nearby, watching the monkeys in the morning, looking at the beautiful exotic flowers that were around, because there was nothing else to really engage with. So I looked at what the natural world had to offer me. But there was another gentleman there who had his phone with him all the time. And I would watch him walk by incredible scenes of animals playing, and he wouldn't see it because he was so into his phone. So we need to remove some of these objects at certain periods. And that's where I spoke earlier about the importance of creating limits, that placing boundaries and limits on our attention is what allows us to be truly limitless, tap into our own internal potential, because we're holding two opposing forces. We're holding the opposing forces, which is a mind that is always in progress, is always in motion of wanting more and better, and the idea that there's a better alternative future out there. But there's the other side of us, the opposing force, which is less strong and less sexy and less idealistic, which is about experiencing this present moment for what it is, experiencing the textures of the taste of the foods you're eating, experiencing the facial features and the facial gestures of the person that you're in conversation with. There's so many things to experience in this world, but we're often deprived from it because we're caught in the dopamine desire feedback loop.
That was incredible. I absolutely loved all that. And you bring up so many amazing points. I've had this idea many times where we look at the artificial phone or the artificial world on the screen, and then we begin to lose like the idea and the understanding of like the majesty and the awe of life. It's like we're in this artificial world, but we don't want to experience the raging river or the beautiful sunset or nothing's ever good enough. It's interesting that the mind wants like the phone rather than to be exploring India, or the mind wants the phone rather than doing a beautiful walk and looking at God's creation and really exploring it. And I remember I think it was Clifford Mahooty who was talking about meditation, and he said like how absurd it was. And he's just like, why? He's like one of my Native American teachers. He's just like, why would you close your eyes at the sunrise? Like, look at it. It's so beautiful and magnificent. And I just thought about that. I was like, yeah, that's right. Like, why would my eyes be closed? And it was just like this simple idea, but it comes back to that presence, the power of presence. And one thing you spoke about earlier about responding to what happens in our life with your friend who had that challenge, it reminds me of David Goggins. I just finished reading his second book, and the guy is an absolute animal, like 2 busted knees and just doing the most insane things on like 2 basically broken knees. And but he said like the mindset of he thought he was going to lose his legs, his ability to run, his ability to be active, and he's like, I'd be sad for a minute, or he didn't use the word sad, he used Goggins words, but he's like, then I would transform in what I'm going to do next. He wouldn't wallow in that. He's like, how am I going to direct my energy forward? And that's how we get out of victim mentality, right? And there's also this other concept you keep touching on, which is the more concept of like the FOMO, or like there's something better, right? How do I maximize this experience rather than sitting in and experiencing whatever you're having at the present moment as like, this is everything is here right now, and this is the absolute best it can be, and you don't need to add anything to it. And I feel like that's where that yin yang comes in, where we can modify and change our environment, and we also need to accept it and really experience it at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, you're speaking to something that I just like to draw people's attention to if they want to explore it. It's on my Substack, The Inner Landscape. And it was the first article that I posted, which was titled Talk to Me. And just to give you an insight of what I was exploring in the article, I was in Miami in February, and I got in an Uber, and I saw a new feature in the Uber, which was that I could choose, before I got in a taxi, my conversation preference. So I could choose whether I wanted to converse or have a quiet ride. And I showed that to a friend. I said, look at this. They said, oh my God, that's great. Wow, God, there's so many taxis that I've been in where, God, the guy was just yapping and I wanted to do work, or I just wanted to have some quiet time. to have that is really, really, really good. And I couldn't get it out of my head. Like I was really thinking, God, that is lethal. And it's lethal because it gives you the impression that you can mediate. We've got this impression now that we can mediate the world. Okay, so we think that we can control the conditions of the world based on our needs and demands. So an interesting example of that is like, yes, we conquered the night through electricity and through being able to create streetlights, etc. We conquered the night in that sense, that the way that life and business and commerce used to come to a natural foreclosure because of the presence of the night. We overcame that. But we haven't overcome the natural mechanisms within ourselves, which is our circadian rhythm. We're still pinned in by that. That evolutionary system is still there. So you can be given the impression, the image that we've conquered the night, but internally, I don't know if we ever will, but there's going to be a need and a necessity always to find some rest in the evening, because that's when the body itself is starting to wind down, even though you might feel that you take an extra cup of coffee and you can go. But in the long run, that's causing some consequences for you. But just to add to this is this sense of this belief that we can optimize our experience. And that only happens in pseudo environments. It only happens in fake environments which we create. You cannot optimize or maximize your experience in the real world apart from actually experiencing what it actually is in that moment. So in the piece that I wrote, I was just exploring that this thought that everything is optional. This is what's coming up in our lives now, that everything should be a choice and optional, that I can choose to arrange and organize my life the way that I want. And that makes us incredibly weak and fragile, because then when the conditions arise in a way that we didn't expect it to, or we can't adjust or alter, or God forbid, you have chosen to get into the Uber and you've chosen that you want a quiet ride and the Uber driver didn't see it, and then they start talking to you, what do? What happens in that situation? You've come in with the expectation that nobody's going to talk to you, and now somebody is. So what I was kind of exploring there is that magical moments open up with the spontaneity with feeling like we're not actually controlling our lives, but it's a co-creation. There's something happening. There's a dance between the natural world and the other human beings around us. And that's where the beauty is. That's where the aliveness is. The aliveness doesn't come from putting a clenched, tightly sealed system around how you live that nobody else can infiltrate. I'm, of course, talking about the importance of creating some boundary and structure in your life, but I'm not talking about it at the detriment of your interaction and experience with the world. I'm actually talking about it so that it can heighten and give you more of an experience with the world, because the pseudo environments which we enter into, the pseudo environments meaning these created virtual environments, are not real. They are created. They are curated. The realest thing we have is the reality that we deal with, not the Tamagotchi-like virtual people. Because I had a Facebook page, I had an Instagram page, I had different social apps. I deleted them, and I am here. I have not changed. I did not lose a sense organ. I did not lose a capacity to engage with certain things. There were certain sports I used to follow. I stopped following them because I realized, what am I doing? I'm just feeding into the entertainment system, the entertainment cycle that's there, but it's not actually enriching my life or my experience. There's certain sports which are dear to my heart, and I've gone through the heartbreak and the emotional cycles of supporting Arsenal this season, and I'm heading over to London on Tuesday to see them. And the price that I paid for the tickets are probably going to be at half the value because they lost against Man City at the weekend. And I know that is a created kind of virtual experience. It's not really real life, the Premier League and all that, but it's a creation that I enter into. But I don't want to enter into too many of them. I want to make sure that there's enough space for me to experience and give time and attention to the real world. And that's the big thing that we're talking about here, Matt. Of course, there are tips and techniques, and there's plenty of them out there. And you can probably go onto ChatGPT and ask it itself, and it'll give you some tips and techniques to really manage your attention. But really, the big question, the big topic that you and I are here talking about is how we choose to experience life. And hopefully that the more space we give to a real, spontaneous, alive experience of life allows us then and gives us the potential to feel more human, to feel more whole, to do better work, to be more present in our lives, to really actually do the best work, the right work, not the busy work, because that brings that clarity of mind to set that direction in moving towards the person that you want to become and that you should become. because there's no point leaving that potential on the wayside when we get this one life and this one opportunity. So that's why I think this topic of attention is so important, because to me, I believe that it's all encompassing. It covers all space.
Amazing. Very beautifully said. This whole show has been incredible and very actionable, like between the analogies and the understanding and how we can apply this. So I really enjoyed it. Is there anything that you wish that we had talked about, or you want to leave the listeners with before we close the show?
There's nothing floating to the top of my mind. No. I feel like we've had a good conversation. I've really enjoyed speaking to you. You've created a great space to allow topics to breathe. And I felt very comfortable talking to you about things that are broad, but yet extremely relevant. Whereas often conversations can be sucked into narrow subject matters that are top of mind, but not actually probing at the deeper things that we need to discuss. So I want to thank you for that, because it's been a great pleasure getting to move into those spaces and talk about the things that I consider to be meaningful for myself and meaningful for others, meaningful hopefully for you that is listening to this as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, my pleasure. And, fundamentally what you're speaking about is knowing yourself, right? That space to experience life directly. That's how you know yourself. And just that alone as the most basic and apex idea, that's going to expand to absolutely everything. I think you can learn everything you need to through life, and that's going to depend on the quality of your attention and the quality of your focus. And I feel like fundamentally that's what you're teaching, which is incredibly important. So thank you so much for your work. Thanks for coming on the show. If people want to find you, they want to dive in, they want to get you on your one social media channel, where do they go?
So the one social media channel is LinkedIn. That's where the presence is. And if you go there, you can probably get access to most things. So yeah, Patrick McAndrew on LinkedIn. From there, you'll be able to see the newsletter, which is called The Inner Landscape, and it's about understanding the deepening relationship between humans and technology. And then HARA.co is the company website. So if you listen to this and found it valuable, or have any comments or criticisms that you'd like to share with me, because I'm happy to hear both sides, please connect with me on LinkedIn and send me a message, as that is the space where we can interact.
Excellent. Well, thanks for coming on the show. I appreciate it, man.
Likewise.